So we hope that we will be able to finish this session on time rather than after the time for lunch. So we are going to be quite quick, and I'll ask the panel, the presenters, to be quite quick. We have got time allocated to each one of us. I'll just give a brief introduction to the session as well as a background. This is the second time that we are having an economic session in the CBA conference. We had the first session last year in Tanzania, where we had a few presentations from different parts of the world, just highlighting some of the issues that we encounter, some of the economic issues that we encounter in community-based adaptation. And what we're going to do at this CBA conference is to try and carry over some of those issues as part of the background to this session, and then bring in more economic aspects to fit within the to fit into the theme of this conference, which is upscaling. And at the last CBA conference, we established a working group on economics, which has been communicating on an ad hoc basis over the year, that helped to shape the way in which this year's economic session is framed. And we have borrowed a few issues, a few concepts from other areas that were covered in other sessions last year. And looking at upscaling as the theme of this session, it's really quite difficult to find one area of focus from an economics perspective. Normally, when one hears about upscaling, you think about, multiplying either the number of community members you're working with from a small number to a big number. And if you're trying to integrate economic concepts or economic issues, you're tempted to use the same approach as well, which is, if you're looking at costs of adaptation, if you're looking at benefits of adaptation, just multiply from a small number to a big number by a certain magnitude. However, it is quite important for us to understand the theory of change associated with upscaling, for us to be able to appropriately apply economic aspects. And we have got to look at the assumptions that underlie upscaling as a concept before we can really say this is the economic tool or the economic approach that we're going to use. And we've got to understand that in upscaling there are different drivers, economic and non-economic drivers, that lead to upscaling. And therefore, in this session, we realize and we acknowledge that we are only addressing one component of the issues or the drivers of upscaling. Just to give you a brief overview of what areas this session is going to cover, we have got on one end a coverage of economics as a tool, which really looks at mostly evaluation tools. The entry point here is where people would like to look at different adaptation options, different adaptation strategies and actions, and decide on which ones to take up, which ones to upscale, which ones to replicate, which ones to mainstream. And also the economic tools are useful in as far as decisions about the wise use of resources is concerned. And therefore, we're looking at tools such as cost effectiveness, cost benefit analysis, and things like that. That is on one end of the spectrum. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have got economics in practice, whereby communities, policymakers are able to use economic principles in their day-to-day actions rather than just employing specific tools. And the users of tools change as you move from one end to the next. On the left-hand side, we have got mostly experts employing specific tools, and on the other extreme, we have got communities and decision makers themselves using concepts. And there is also kind of a range, there is also a differentiation in the way in which quantitative and qualitative methods are employed across the spectrum. And in the middle there, which is not really something clearly divided, are models for wider involvement. When you want to upscale, we've got to look at models for channeling resources, as well as infrastructure, be they institutions, community organizations, and so on, for enabling wider participation in community-based adaptation, and also looking at markets and value chains that enable adaptation to take place more effectively and more efficiently, providing for the involvement of more people. So our presentations are going to, I don't want to say fit within these boxes, because it's not very wise for me to talk about boxes in this kind of forum, but our presentations are categorized according to the three boxes in this slide, not saying that those are all the economic aspects that we need to take into consideration. And as we move forward, with this session, we expect input from people here who have got experiences in the different areas where we're considering the use of economics, from the use of tools to community participation. And at this point, I would like to ask my co-chair to lead the presentations. I would like to introduce Mrs. Nahau Rooney. She is from the Papua New Guinea. She is the chairperson of the climate change chairperson in Manus administration in Papua New Guinea, and also former Minister of Justice in Papua New Guinea. Could you please lead the next round?
Thank you, Chairman. Our first speaker is Rachel Bega. Okay, thank you very much.
Well, good morning, everybody. I decided I would not use PowerPoint, so you'll just have to listen to me. What I'm going to say arose out of a conversation that Muyeye and I had nearly a year ago, when we both our organisations received an invitation from the UNFCCC Secretariat to a workshop on looking at costs and benefits of adaptation. And it became clear for the framing of the workshop that the focus was very much on economic tools and cost-benefit analysis in particular. And for both of us, that rang some alarm bells. So governments just love something that's very easy to quantify, not just governments, but officials, accountants, economists, because it makes their life easier. But for those of us who are working with communities, with great social complexities, inequities, and so on, getting everything down to a sort of monetary value is really problematic. And I just want to highlight some points on this. Clearly, in the situation that we're all in our work situation, our national situations, we're in a situation of scarce resources. So, of course, tools are needed to assess what's the most cost-effective option to yield the greatest adaptation benefit. Cost-benefit analysis has important uses, but it also has some crucial blind spots, particularly, as I said, for the kind of work we're trying to do at the local level. So what I'm going to say is that it should not be the only tool for looking at pre-project options when you're trying to evaluate which is the best option, and nor should it be the only tool used for monitoring and evaluation of post-project benefits. Because the aims of community-based adaptation are multiple, and they include social and environmental benefits as well as economic ones, and so other tools must be needed. But where cost-benefit analysis may be a useful tool is, for example, comparing options for specific capital investment projects, such as you've already identified with the community that water shortage is a problem and that there are different options for improving water supply. You know, there might be a reservoir, there might be diverting a stream or various other options, providing each house with a rainwater harvesting tank. And that's where cost-benefit analysis could become quite a useful tool. But it can fall short when we're trying to meet other key needs in community adaptation planning, because if it's going to be sustainable at the local level, people have got to be able to control and adapt the technologies that they use for their livelihoods and for managing natural resources. So, for example, trials might show that a technology shown to be cost-effective in certain situations, such a new seed variety that copes well with drought, but needs high inputs of fertilizer, might initially seem an appropriate technology option. But, for example, if there's a strong likelihood that fertilizer costs will rise and people may not have the resources in future to purchase it, then this isn't a long-term adaptive option. So you can't use cost-benefit analysis alone. Another key issue that, as I said, cost-benefit analysis aggregates benefits. Every benefit has to be put into a monetary term to be aggregated. And so you have the dilemma, supposing you have some kind of irrigation scheme and a few of the better off people in a community benefit, the larger landowners. Multiplying their benefit by the number of people who benefit could yield the same result as a scheme which allows 10 times the number of people to benefit by a much smaller income increase. But if we're focusing on the needs of the most vulnerable people, then we're interested in something that benefits the majority of people and not something that is purely yields the greatest economic benefit. And this is a particular issue that we may have to fight for when national and international funding begins to flow for adaptation, because governments will want quick results, they'll want something to show for things, and the easiest option may be a big scheme that benefits relatively few people and maybe benefits an export crop, rather than a more complex, locally managed scheme that benefits more people. So the social and equity issues are, for us, at least as important as the economic ones. The other issue is the key issue of uncertainty in all the work on adaptation. Not just uncertainty because currently we don't have precise information on climate change, but because inherently we are never going to have precise information on climate change. The systems are too complex and the range of uncertainty will always be great. So adaptation planning and action has got to be dynamic and responsive to unanticipated climatic trends. So therefore, an initial estimation at a given point in time of cost and benefits may become inaccurate as actual climate changes or increased climate variability kick in. And so the range of uncertainty has got to be present and taken into account in any evaluation. But at the same time, so if you can use cost-benefit analysis with together other tools, and this has been done in studies in Namibia and Tanzania, you can get an economic impact of climate change might actually seem quite small at the national level, But if you look at the equity and distribution of that climate impact, it's huge at the local level, and you can identify that, or it has been identified, that smallholder farmers are the most vulnerable. So an economic analysis alone would say, well, we don't have to worry too much about climate change, it just impacts on our gross domestic product by about 1%, so let's put our resources into something else. But if you do look at the equity issues, then you realize that actually climate change adaptation will be very important. Too often development NGOs do not undertake rigorous analysis of the cost effectiveness, nor do they often undertake post-programme evaluation of the wider impacts of the work, both positive and negative. And the reason for this is that we get funding for, say, a 3-year period or a 5-year period, and when you want to evaluate whether the programme has worked, you don't want to do it just at the end of that period. You really need to see, did what you do, was it sustainable? You need to be able to go back. So that's why we tend not to do it. We also tend to be very focused on learning the positive lessons and very reluctant to share where we've gone wrong. But since we're in a situation of resources far too scarce for need, we need to develop greater skills in this area of looking at cost effectiveness, especially as we upscale from projects to programs and from local initiatives to district and national adaptation plans. So we do need a toolkit of a range of different tools that will help diverse audiences choose appropriate valuation methods for their needs. And the kit's users will include communities, NGOs, local government, national government, and others in the international community. And we're hoping that the presentations that follow mine will contribute towards identifying appropriate methodologies for looking at the costs and benefits of adaptation. Thank you. Yes, it went into sleep mode.
Good morning. This paper was developed as a result of our meeting in Tanzania with Muyeye, that we come up with a session on economics of adaptation. Okay, so this is about the economics of adaptation to climate change of sea cucumber fishers in the Philippines. Oh, if you try to look at the map, the Philippines is the red one, no? It's comprised of 7,107 islands during low tide. So less one during high tide. The Philippines is the second major producer and exporter of sea cucumber in the world. Sorry, I lost my voice 2 days ago. And it is dried and exported to China, Hong Kong, Singapore, Korea, Taiwan, China, and Japan. Commercial exploitation of sea cucumbers in the Philippines dates back to the late 18th century. Currently, there are 3 methods of harvesting it. One is through commercial fishing. The second one is artisanal fishing for sea cucumbers as just a bycatch, no, among other fishes that are caught. The third one is gleaning in intertidal reef flats during low tide. However, climate change has affected this industry and has decreased income for our economy, the commercial fishing sector, as well as the marginal or artisanal fishermen who rely on it as their source of livelihood. So the Philippines experiences on the average about 20 typhoons that occur annually. And then here is a map showing the vulnerable areas to typhoons. The ones being most vulnerable are the red ones, and the green are the least vulnerable. El Nino has been experienced more frequently. And in the many islands and coastal villages, income from sea cucumber fishery used to contribute a significant portion of the family income, especially where sea cucumber is abundant in intertidal zones. However, the plight of the informal sector workers, like the sea cucumber gleaners, is often ignored and their livelihood given scant consideration. Thus, this paper focuses on sea cucumber gleaners because they have no control of the shallow coral reef flats where they catch their harvest. So this is done by small scale or marginal fishers involving men, women, and children. Here is a woman diver who collects by gleaning. And then here is a map of the study site somewhere in Sorsogon. It's in the mainland of Luzon, where the shoreline has changed by changed by 70 meters for the past 50 years. The source of this is the University of the Philippines Marine Science Institute. The condition of the corals doesn't warrant a healthy state of the marine ecosystem. The survey conducted by UPMSI reveals that the number of species is quite low. The density and biomass of fishes and other animals are likewise seen to be low. This is not unique to this area. It is common to most of the coastal areas in the Philippines. So the communities are aware of the declining quality of marine resources, and they also recognize that they have been their catch is lower. And because of recent campaigns on protection of marine habitats, most of the people are already aware of conservation using marine protected areas, no? So actually, this community has it has established an MPA or marine protected area. It has been shown that the MPAs are very effective community-based methods to keep coral reefs and seagrass beds healthy. It has even worked for the restoration of damaged reefs. MPAs in many areas around the world now host rich marine biodiversity. The idea is to keep a certain portion of the sea, about 15 to 30 hectares, and keep it as a no-take zone. So there are markers to delineate the area. And there is a community or municipal ordinance issued to declare that it is an MPA. And then there is a 50 to 100 meter buffer zone around the area. Okay, so the goal is to allow the ecosystem to recover, and then it has been proven to increase fish density, biomass, and many studies have proven recruitment and spillover effect. The local government, the Fisheries Ordinance or Republic Act 8550 says that about 50% of municipal waters should be declared as marine refuge and sanctuary, popularly known as MPA. Okay, so they designate a bantay dagat or a warden to guard the MPA from poachers. In a study made by Alcala, he revealed that out of the 564 MPAs in the Philippines, only 33% are considered to be functional. The other are considered as paper MPAs or simply non-functional. And he also stressed that those that succeeded have one thing in common. All of them have good financial mechanisms. Okay, among these successful MPAs, ecotourism is the most commonly used financial model. However, many areas where MPAs are already established are not yet ready to provide basic services needed for ecotourism industry to flourish. Downstream industries like hotels, restaurants, roads, and accessibility are not yet in place. Thus, the MPAs have failed to provide significant benefits to the community. So the particular community that I was telling you about organized themselves, the sea cucumber gleaners, and came up with two other MPA options. One is the MPA combined with artificial reef, and the other one is MPA combined with the ranch model. So the first one artificial reefs are introduced in the MPA system. And there are many forms. No, these are just some of the designs. Okay, these are known as reef balls. And then this one uses ceramic materials that mimic branching corals. Now, it has advantages and disadvantages, not natural, of course, high cost of investment, highly dependent on tourism. And then, since the composition of the artificial substrate may not be as homogeneous as the composition of the natural, the recruitment rates is low. In the second model, the MPA sea cucumber ants model, it's a marriage between the MPA and the sea and the ants. Okay, so with this one, it is not highly dependent on tourism. Plus, it does not involve any inputs like the artificial reefs. Okay. And then sea ranching, on the other hand, is not a new technology. And then they do not require inputs. Okay. So this is an example of the MPA sea ranch model. You have there the MPA protected area in red, and the sea ranch is in near it. Okay, just to sum it up, because we don't have enough time. This is the cost and returns for the existing one. No? Note on the lower right-hand side that the cost is about 357,640 pesos, while the returns is lower, 38,528. For the other one, MPA artificial reef model, please turn to the lower right-hand side. The cost is 1.4 million pesos, and the returns is only 443,000. Now, for the MPA sea ranch, the cost is 100,000, while the returns is 374,000 annually. Comparing the three, no, the best one is the MPA ranch model, where the payback is over a year. The MPA artificial model is more than 56 years. And the internal rate of return is almost 40% for the MPA ranch model. The benefit cost ratio is more than 1 compared to the other two is less than 1. And the net present worth is positive. Okay, I also did that for economic analysis, and the results are also almost the same. So in conclusion, the financial and economic analysis of the three management options reveals some significant findings, and there is a need to find better ways of managing the MPAs. Most strategies must be developed to reduce the annual cost and maintenance and enforcement. Sustainable revenue mechanisms must be put in place. And the recommendations is an innovation in the management of MPAs through the MPA sea ranch model. Okay, thank you.
Our next speaker is Jessica Frank. Oh, sorry.
Good morning. My presentation is on farmer organizations as a potential vehicle for scaling up community-based adaptation in rural areas. So what's the problem? Well, the reason we're all here is because of the need to scale up community adaptation, and key to that is identifying local institutions which will deliver that in a less resource-intensive and more cost-effective manner. There's been some mention of local government in the last few days, but this model that I'm going to present is using local farmer organizations as well. I'm not going to attempt to draw any conclusions. Our initiative is really just in its infancy, but I'm going to use the case study just to try and highlight some advantages and challenges which may be associated with this model. So our partner in this initiative is Gumatindu Coffee Cooperative. Gumatindu is based in the eastern part of Uganda, in Mount Elgon, which is right on the Kenyan border. It's an organisation with a membership of 5,000 smallholder coffee producers. And that membership of 5,000 is split into 11 primary societies, each with between about 400 and 500 members. And they produce Arabica coffee, which is highly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. It flourishes within a very narrow temperature band and requires really specific rainfall and sunshine interactions in order for the beans to ripen properly. In Mount Elgon, there's intense land pressure and high deforestation, and the farmers are cultivating on very steep slopes, and as a result, they're losing a lot of topsoil, and particularly in years when there are very heavy rains, which is likely to increase with climate change, they're really at risk of soil erosion and mudslides. And in fact, last year there was a really devastating mudslide, which killed about 350 people in the area. So the smallholders there are highly vulnerable because of their socioeconomic status, the crops that they're growing, and also their geological location. So just very briefly, the story so far. We carried out an assessment of future climate risks with what available data we could find. And we also did an assessment of existing vulnerability. There's a few pictures here. The men on the right-hand side, Gumatindu has a number of field staff, about 10, and then also some quality control officers. And they are out in the field, visiting farmers, supporting them with production techniques and organic agricultural practices, and know the farmers well. And so we're basically a mini in-house extension team. And we went around with them looking at the existing environmental degradation and interviewing farmers to discuss their vulnerabilities. And then identification of adaptation options. Well, we carried out a few days of workshops with one particular primary society, Konakoi, raising awareness, gathering their perception of climate variability, and also trying to carry out a lot of cause and effect diagrams to understand what the impacts of climate change would be on their livelihoods. And the project that came out as by far the one that was prioritized by the group was a cow share project. Cows and coffee may not initially spring to mind, but the reason is they're organic farmers, so they can only use organic manure, and they have huge fertility problems there. And so by sharing cows, they have manure for their farms, which will help stabilize the soil and increase production, and also obviously it's a good source of diversification of income and improves the health of your family. And there are already livestock in the region. That's not a new thing to the area. So finally, project planning and implementation. Well, we're just at the beginning, but we facilitated a new relationship with a local NGO who are going to help with the training, and there's sort of 3 areas to the project. The first one is social development training. They work with the community to ensure that the people who receive the livestock first are the most marginalized, so they can elevate their social status, give them some resources, and then the calves will be spread out among the community as they're born. They also receive agricultural training and livestock management training, and finally, the livestock. And finally, just a point on that, Twin had very, very limited resource to put towards this project, but Willington Muyeye, who's the managing director of Gumatindu, went to the board and requested some extra funding, which they were able to give. So they've actually matched our funding with a few £1,000s. And furthermore, Konakoi have put in some of their own funding. And they receive a fair trade premium, and it's very small, and they generally use it for social development projects. But this year, they've decided to put it towards this project. It's a small contribution, but it is a contribution nonetheless. And that's just some pictures from the workshops. So some of the advantages of potentially working with farmer organizations to deliver community adaptation. Economies of scale through large membership. The reason why farmer organizations exist is that they're trying to market their produce through collective action, excuse me, which allows them to remain competitive in the market because of the economies of scale that they enjoy. And those same economies of scale can be enjoyed by through adaptation projects. So you're reaching hundreds or even thousands of farmers rather than tens. And as a result, if you're bringing in inputs or trying to support access to services, those costs really begin to come down. Possibly the most important, existing social capital, infrastructure and technical expertise. I was able to go around with the staff workers to visit farmers. They already have those relationships. There's a lot of trust there, and they already have the infrastructure for disseminating new technologies. So they have the extension team, and they also have the smaller organizations, and then even within each primary society there are lead farmers who've been identified because of their good techniques, who the others can go to for advice. So there's already the structure for disseminating new ideas. Farmer organizations are social enterprises. Well, this is twofold really. I already mentioned that they are contributing some of their own resources. Obviously, in a lot of situations, those resources will be fairly minimal, but it is potentially an additional source of funds, as well as just only donor funding, which most community projects would rely on. And also, their links to market. We mentioned the fair trade premium already, but by linking into the market with a product, there is potential for additional value chain funding. And finally, networks and partnerships. Well, farm organisations have the possibility to be linked into a wide array of networks. International ones like fair trade, but also often national and regional product networks, or also we've already heard today about linking in, the potential to link in with research programs, directly working with farmers to support sort of participatory research and extension. And finally, some of the challenges, there are many, but I've just picked 3. Exclusion of marginal groups. Something that we talked about a lot yesterday was the landless. In order to be a member of a farm organisation, really you need to have land to start with. So the membership will often not include some of the most marginalised, and so they need to be supported too. This also leads on to reaching beyond the organisation's member. This is a challenge and an opportunity, really. The farmers of a farmer organisation tend to be scattered over quite a wide area. So for projects which need to take a more holistic landscape approach, there's an opportunity there for the farmer organisations. But really, they're used to just working with their membership. So it would require partnerships with other local institutions to really bring everyone in together. And my final challenge, competing priorities. This is really twofold. A lot of farmer organisations really struggle both in terms of resource and time. So they may not be able to manage a project which isn't directly involved in their core business. In this case, Gumatindu have really taken this on board and they're managing it because they feel it's within their interests. But in other cases, they may need a lot more support with the management of a project outside their core business. And also conflicting priorities in the sense that this project is about fertilizer, which really supports production, but potentially one of the key adaptation interventions may be diversification, in which case that could be an issue for a project being managed by a farmer organisation which may not want to encourage farmers to divert their labour and resource away from their key product that they're marketing. So that's it. As I said, no conclusions, but that's what we're trying to do, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Catherine Cross. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Catherine Cross with IUCN. I'm going to be talking about microfinance institutions and climate change adaptation, looking at supporting communities in a changing climate. Before I begin, I just wanted to give you some background. This is just a concept, it's an idea, it's not a project, full-size project per se. It was developed by, through an organization called IIED. I did a program on leadership and sustainable development, and we had to do a project. So this is some of the thinking that has come behind it. And the outputs that we produced was more along the lines of a communications package to engage microfinance institutions, their investors, funders, and organizations, specifically in Eastern Africa, those that are working in community-based adaptation on applying microfinance to climate change adaptation needs. So we put together some targeted messages that would be appropriate to these different stakeholders. So the context is that access to finance can be critical to facilitate investment in climate-proof livelihoods and to prepare for uncertainty and extreme events. So if we want to if communities want to invest in adaptation activities, sometimes they need some small amount of investment, which could potentially be provided through different sources. Now, adaptation funds are available, but how do we get them to the people? We hear about large adaptation funds coming through governments, but the challenge is trying to get them down to the local levels. So microfinance institutions are uniquely placed to do this through their existing outreach in communities. Now, microfinance institution customers are vulnerable to climate-related shocks, such as extreme weather events or droughts. And in this case, that means they're more likely to default on loans during extreme weather events and less likely to be able to afford credit in the future. So this isn't good for microfinance institutions because it reduces their customer base because they can't access loans. And it's also not good for the customers, the people who need the loans, because they have reduced access to funds. So what can microfinance institutions do? Well, they have some options. They can either prepare themselves to better respond to climate change impacts, so possibly finding out information on possible impacts and awareness raising. And they have the potential to turn climate change risks into opportunities. I'll give some examples. There's an OECD report on microfinance institutions and climate change in Bangladesh and Nepal, actually. And it found that many lending programs supported disaster relief. I think it was about 40%. It supported disaster relief and preparedness, crop diversification, and improving access to irrigation, all of which can help adapt to climate change impacts. There were even some specific programs to support construction of weather-resistant housing or adoption of drought and salt-tolerant seeds. These projects tended to be small-scale and short-term. So with this in mind, climate change adaptation, microfinance institutions have several options around preparing for climate change and ensuring adaptation within communities. So first of all, they can develop an organizational level disaster plan to manage the possible destruction of fixed assets belonging to the organization itself and the loss of any customer records. More specifically, what we were looking at through LEAD was educating customers about the potential risks and dangers of climate change and how to adapt to them and at least palliate their likely consequences. Another area we were looking at was introducing new products or incentives to support climate change adaptation activities such as crop switching, livelihood diversification or insurance. So for example, microfinance institutions can potentially be an enabler for behavior change by providing loans at potentially lower rates to encourage farmers, let's say, to take up certain conservation, soil and water methods, which can increase their resilience to climate change impacts. They can also consider the introduction of flexibility clauses in their loan contracts to allow for deferral of repayments in case of certain disastrous events. Although in this case, there's the potential impact on repayment culture that needs to be assessed. So I gave you some examples in Bangladesh and Nepal, and we were looking at whether this could be applied in Eastern Africa. And our aim was just to provide information to microfinance institutions in Eastern Africa on why it's important to integrate climate change adaptation into their loan schemes, because a lot of microfinance institutions might not necessarily have that knowledge and information. And this is so that they can ensure that the activities they are financing are sustainable with climate change impacts, and they can ensure long-term economic well-being of the communities they serve. However, there are some limitations and challenges to consider, especially around scaling up. So scaling up of microfinance needs to be realistic. Clients tend to be the most economically active in the community and not necessarily the most vulnerable in a community, which is actually what we're trying to address. Microfinance is not also suited for large-scale investments such as dams or seawalls. And we have to be careful that microfinance doesn't fund practices that can increase vulnerability or maladaptation. So things like encouraging growth in hazard-prone areas, maybe building on floodplains, supporting environmentally unsustainable livelihood strategies. And in some cases, maybe sustaining the status quo when perhaps a shift in livelihoods would have had longer-term benefits. So in terms of next steps, various companies, including one of the people who put together this project, she works for Tridus, a bank. So they're interested in the issue and will be engaged in the future to build on this initial interest. Also, within my own organization, we're looking at how we can integrate this idea into proposals with partners as a component on enhancing livelihoods. And finally, we want to continue to share knowledge and experiences within LEAD network, but also beyond, such as at this conference. So we welcome your inputs and ideas and any feedback. Thanks.
Our next speaker is Martin Obermeyer. Is that right? Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Martin. I'm from the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, and I'm presenting a project on the social technologies and pro-poor market approaches in the Sertão. The Sertão is a semi-arid areas in the northeast of Brazil. And just to give you a little idea on the location, it is directly situated in the Caatinga biome, which is a very biodiversity rich but highly degraded ecosystem. Let me just tell you something about the, I cannot read this. The actual context of adaptation and climate impacts. Despite relatively high precipitation, mainly rain-fed agriculture is already strongly limited. And this is because the rainfalls are unreliable. They are very concentrated in just a few months. So you have basically 3 months of rain. And of course, you have, due to the high temperature, very high evapotranspiration. You also have a lot of unsustainable farming practices, large-scale environmental degradation, and I was already talking about very high poverty and low health and education access. And what is important to say that these extreme weather events we have with droughts, and they play a fundamental role for defining the vulnerability of the small farmers, but their conditions are even bad when there's no extreme event. So if there's no drought, even then families have a lot of problems to deal with or to cope with the impacts. What has been happening so far is basically that you focus on the hydrological solution to overcome the problem of natural hazards. So you build water reservoirs, you build roads, dams, but these have never actually dealt with problems like access to water. And so that many farmers, poor farmers, cannot access this water and they cannot use it for productive uses, which is one of the main points for this, why farmers are very poor and they cannot benefit in the region. And so what is also very marked is that farmers use very rudimentary agricultural practices. And what are they doing for adaptation is basically seek government transfer programs like the Bolsa Família program for very poor families, or they seek public jobs and old age pensions to get a little extra income. So this just gives you an idea on the reality today, little photos. And it's important to stress, however, that despite all the vulnerability we have in the region, is that there is an enormous agricultural potential because we have a lot of water storage capacity in the region, which has been due to these programs on climate disaster or emergency relief, which have focused on creating these water reservoirs, dams. And actually the semi-arid of Brazil is nowadays the semi-arid region with the most developed water storage system in the world. So the impacts of climate change is basically what we're having today is going to be worse. It's going to be worse. The temperatures are going to increase. There will be less rainfall, increased evaporation, and more consecutive days without rain. There's also going to be an increase in El Nino activity, which might provoke higher droughts and also desertification. And the summer temperatures or the growing season temperatures may also increase. And this means that plantation of subsistence crops will probably be very highly affected. So what is Adapt Sertão, this project we are presenting? It's a coalition of organizations that tries to develop and implement a sustainable livelihood strategy for farmers in the region, and trying to scale this up to help rural producers not only to adapt to climate change, but also have a component on development. So it is a pro-poor development, climate-proof development adaptation project. The factors we are addressing is lack of access to technologies. People do not have access to technologies like irrigation, like resistant seeds, drought-resistant seeds. They have a limited capacity. It is not only the farmers, it is also the other, how do you say, at the other levels, at governance, at rural cooperatives, at government, basically. They have very little technical support. Their productive systems are inappropriate for the climate. There's difficult market access and commercialization problems. Farmers do not know where they sell except for local markets. You have very little microcredit, and the public policies are not integrated in the context of the Sertão. The Adapter Sertão focuses on irrigated agriculture, on rain-fed agriculture. Is it 5 minutes left or 5 minutes left? Okay. Huh? Okay. And so the focus on irrigated agriculture, rain-fed agriculture, milk production, and staple crops. So we have various technological options for the farmers to use. It's a very holistic approach. It's not trying to focus on one option like microfinance or use of technology. We're trying to use a distribution network, try to make farmer cooperatives as distributors of technology, so that the middlemen are getting out of the line, and the systems become cheaper. The cooperatives also will provide the technical assistance, and this makes it more close to the rural farmer. And they are more interested in working together with people they know than with people they're living in big cities. It's also about capacity building. I already said that at various levels: conservation of local resources, decreasing vulnerability, microcredit access, commercialization, aggregating value, for example, production of milk, also very important monitoring and communication strategies. So this is basically a package we are trying to do. We are now in 50 families in 4 municipalities. Just to give you one example, and then I will close already. What is a system that a small farmer can buy? It's a small irrigation system just for some food production. He doesn't need a lot of water, and it's cost about $1,300. It's drip irrigation. It comes complete with pipes, pump, technical assistance for the farmer, and we've calculated that the farmer can pay back this system in 3 years. So he increases food security and sells his produce. This is a farmer, just to give an idea, he's earning about 50 reais a day. That is about 30 reais more than other people who work normally. This is a normal wage. And but he only works 2 to 4 hours, so he has other time to have other income possibilities. As I said, it's a big network. We have research institutes, NGOs, farmer cooperatives, schools, community radios. These are the systems. This is bringing research together with farmers. We bring farmers to demonstration sites of Embrapa. This is making aggregation of value, jam production of passion fruit, for example. And so what are the future objectives? Scaling up in the northeastern region. The pilot phase has shown to work. The institutional family is sustainable and is a relatively easily model to be replicated. We started in 1 municipality. We are now in 4 municipalities, and it works. We're linking this to the national plan of climate change. We're trying to link it to the desertification plan to get new funding. And, but what will be important? Scaling up needs subsidies. We need to have local champions who work on this. And just this last slide here. We have local champions, but you need to identify these people who can work with the local farmers, and that takes really time, and it needs good local management. Adaptation may require time, but without public sector support, it's very difficult to reach scale. And so we have some more information. I have also a handout. I was very a little time to have this big project to present it. I have a handout over there, and if you have any questions, you can feel free to ask me anytime. Thank you.
And our last speaker is Ricky Carl.
Thank you, Nahau, Muyeye, for the opportunity, and thank you, everyone, for making the time to be in this session. I'm Ricky Carl. I'm from Micronesia. My presentation will be on the role of conservation trust funds in resourcing CBA at scale. I will briefly discuss two case studies, one in Micronesia, my region, and one in Melanesia. Now, currently there are over 50 conservation trust funds worldwide. Generally, these are independent legal entities. They have a strong board representation from various sectors. They also have a range of activities that is not limited to environment conservation or adaptation. Financial resources include endowments, but many options and mechanisms are available. We do have sinking funds and other options. Conservation trust funds don't implement, so usually the boards that are formed oversee the management and disbursement of the funds. They don't do implementation. Most conservation trust funds have high-level political support in both in-country and internationally, and this represents the two case studies or examples that I want to share. So, can you also speak up? So, given the above, can conservation trust funds be a vehicle for resourcing CBA? In Micronesia, the government leaders, 3 presidents and 2 governors of 2 U.S. Territories in the region, recognizing that they have very limited resources to ensure the effective management of their natural areas, came together and announced to the world at a CBD COP in Curitiba, Brazil, that in order to respond to the CBD requirements, they will be putting 30% of their nearshore resources and 20% of their terrestrial and putting it under effective management by 2020. That comes with the establishment of a trust fund that will ensure that these areas are effectively managed. Currently, this challenge have been able to secure both donor support from international donor community, from donor countries, and also have been able to allow for local revenues to be directed towards the endowment. Similar has been done in the Coral Triangle. So even after the Micronesian Challenge, I think in concept, by virtue of the establishment of the Coral Triangle, we can see that, that this concept can be scaled up to include bigger regions, such as we have with the Coral Triangle, which includes many countries with larger populations than Micronesia. So, because these trust funds ensure the long-term financial sustainability of these governments' effort to working with communities across the region to doing effective conservation. I think in our region, we're already seeing the benefits of trust funds. Recently, we received some funding from ASE to do a pilot project in one of the jurisdictions. Now, the only way that we see this pilot project being scaled up is through the trust fund that we have. This trust fund is intended to take the lessons learned from this pilot project and expand it to include all the communities that are working in conservation. And by conservation, in the islands, we mean climate change adaptation. We loosely use those two terms interchangeably. So when we deal with governments, small governments like these, it is significant that we insulate these trust funds from the changes that take place in government, because come with those changes are changes in priorities. And at the same time, we insulate these activities from any reduction in local revenue. So I think in general, our experience in our region has been that conservation trust funds can resource CBA activities at scale. These are generally independent institutions that are accountable and are transparent. With our experience, these trust funds are in alignment with national development frameworks. And I guess what's important is that when you have a trust fund, that these trust funds complement government support for CPA, and that they build on community action. They shouldn't be the sole provider. Even with a trust fund, you need to explore other opportunities that can support or complement what will be coming out of these trust funds. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've had a range of presentations. We would like to take some bit of time to discuss what is coming out of the presentations, as well as to make some contributions from our own experience. The purpose really to have this range of presentations is to get a flavor of what is happening in other areas. And it's quite deliberate that we had, first of all, more technical presentations about the application of cost-benefit analysis, moving on to some real experiences with adaptation tools that can be applied in general. So whether you are a community or an NGO or a donor who wants to deploy adaptation resources, there is a wide range of approaches that could be used, which is what we're trying to bring here. But this is just a limited set of different approaches, and we believe that there are different approaches that people are using out there, which we would like to bring into this session. So our discussion should be a mixture of both questions of clarifications as well as experiences from other places, because what we would like to do at the end of the day is to take this into a package that would constitute one of the chapters of the book from this conference. So I would like to ask any quick questions of clarifications as well as experiences from elsewhere. Yes, madam.
I am Farhana Sharmin from Practical Action Bangladesh. I want to talk about the Martin's presentation. Here is a private and public partnership in the, he mentioned in the presentation. I think it's a good initiative to include private sector in any project for CBA. But he said about the output or product, maybe product sell, something like that with the private sector. But I'm saying that in case of we, the development sectors, identify the need from the community and to modify the input support from the private sector, like generation of invention of cell of some saline or drought-tolerant varieties for the community, that kind of adaptable activities to include, to link with private sector and the development workers or the community. So I'm more interested to know about the system from input to output of his mentioned project. What is really done for the linkage of private sector and the development sector?
Thank you very much. We'll take a few questions and then ask the presenters to respond to them. There was a question from, there's Tom Downing, and then there's the lady next to him, and then we'll have the other. So can we start with Tom?
Good morning, I'm Tom Downing. Thanks for the presentation and the chairs for organizing what is, I think, going to be one of the frontiers of community-based adaptation, trying to figure out what actually works. I had just a short comment. One is that we view adaptation generally as a wicked problem. That's a technical term. And one of the key features of wicked problems is the framing of the problem itself is part of the problem. That different stakeholders have different framings and therefore different criteria, different rational paradigms and power paradigms that govern their choice. And I think we saw some good examples of framing by communities that are using these tools in sound ways, and I think that was really helpful. One of the clear messages is no one decision framework or decision analysis is going to be adequate for all framings, for all problems. And I think one of the things that would be nice to see in case studies in the future is sort of an ensemble of decision choices. So if you had 4 or 5 major stakeholders involved, including private sector, including national government, including the beneficiaries themselves, and attack the problem in their own ways, then do you get a convergence of results or at least a field of possible choices that reflect different values and different assumptions and different boundaries around there. But I want to come back to one of the first questions, is whether the task at hand is to choose good actions that have all sorts of objectives, or whether the challenge in front of us is to choose the best action that responds to uncertainty about climate futures. And I think there's a lack of very clear tools in dealing with uncertainty. Most of the people and most of the frameworks that we see tend to assume that the uncertainty is reducible, that it can be handled in a probabilistic framework rather than a values framework, and that the choices are then rational choices rather than dealing with robustness or adaptation as a process. Thank you.
Hello. Yes, this is Professor Mohammad Hai from Bangladesh. I'm very informed with a lot of good papers from this session, the economics of CBA, but I have a question to Ms. Rachel on her paper, Pre-Project Assessment for Community-Based Adaptation. Ms. Rachel, as cost-benefit analysis represents one of the important economic tools to assess options for adapting community challenge, climate change, but I do believe that social and equity returns on investment and for poor approaches, it needs to be given prominence in the current cost-benefit frameworks. Also, do you think that a thorough toolkit is needed to address a diverse audience? And to what are a few of samples of toolkit? Would you please?
Can we have the last question on this side? Yeah, before we get into responses.
Hello. My name is Kenya Kono, and I'm from FAO Regional Office in Bangkok. I have maybe a bit related question. I think for the first day of this meeting, we shared that adaptation is a continuous process, and it's different from coping, and it's preparing for the future. And in this context, what we would like to do is we would like to make an impact to the local people and policymaker to make decision to change. And I think change also requires cost. And if people think benefit is more than cost, then people change. And I just want to ask you, maybe any of the participants or any of the presenter from the field, that what's the key factors to visualize this cost and benefit, and then which eventually lead to the change of the local people?
Thank you very much. I would like to ask the panelists to respond in turn. There are some specific questions directed at panelists, and then there are some general questions that we'll try and respond to together as a group. But I would like to start with Rachel going leftwards, and then myself and co-chair will respond to the other more general questions.
Okay. Yes, Tom made a point about that some of the frameworks that we were presenting, or that are generally presented on adaptation, don't deal adequately with uncertainty, and I totally agree with him, and that is why we had our session yesterday on adaptive capacity, where we tried to emphasize that what we do need to do to enable people to adapt is to build different skills that will enable them to live comfortably in a world of uncertainty. It's not simple to identify this, and it is true that many of the tools that people try to use to capture what are the costs and benefits of adaptation, or tools to measure or evaluate what should be done out of a range of choices, do tend to present the outcomes as certainties, which you can then cost and weigh up. And so therefore, we do very much need, in using these tools, to make sure that we look at different assumptions, so that the assumptions are those things that can change. You assume that floods will only happen every alternate year, for example. What happens to your decision-making tool if you say floods may happen every year? It's those kind of things that we need to do. Then there was a question on what are the key factors for visualizing costs and benefits, because if benefits outweigh costs, then people change. I think we must not underestimate the ability of even very poor people to address from their perspective what are the benefits and what are the costs. And we have to respect that their perception of risks may be very different from ours as wealthy outsiders. I recall somebody telling me about a project where people thought that the key issue for a community was, I don't know, lack of sewerage or something, but actually what people were most concerned about was road accidents on the road they had to cross to get to other facilities. So we have to respect what people see as the major risk that they face, and then their assessment of the benefits and the costs. And of course we can help them with tools, but their assessment must be the one we work with. Now, there was a question addressed to me from somebody from Bangladesh, and I'm afraid because you spoke so close to the microphone, it was not really possible for me to hear it. So if you're able very briefly to say what your question was, I will try and answer it.
What are the important toolkits that you want to, about the cost-benefit analysis, you want to mention in your paper? Can you give some few of the important toolkits for cost-benefit analysis measuring?
I don't think that I want to list a list of toolkits or that I'm competent to do so. Cost-benefit analysis is a tool, and there are, you can get guidelines on how to do cost-benefit analysis. The point I was making is that we do need other tools. We do need to put together a toolkit. And hopefully in the chapter that a number of us will try and help Muyeye to write, we will come up with some kind of tools that might together make a kit. But I don't think in this session we can claim to do that.
I'll ask the other panelists to be very brief because we don't have much time left. If you don't have a comment, just let us know. Yeah.
Thank you, Muyeye. With regard to uncertainty, and the fact that adaptation should be a continuous process, I believe that that's why we need trust funds, because these trust funds are designed to distribute funds over a long period of time. And if well managed, I think they can prepare communities, at least to a certain extent, with the resources that they need to adapt in a continuous process or fashion. Thank you.
Just only on this question of uncertainty, I think even though you have uncertainty, you know, but the broad picture is that at least in the semi-arid areas, you will have an increasing, for example, hydrological deficit, and then you should at least try to make, even this uncertainty doesn't permit you to do nothing. So you have to test several things, strategies like this drip irrigation, what can be drought-resistant seeds. But you have to test these things, whether they are working, for example, with current droughts. And then, of course, you have to see whether this would be eventually possible to lead to adaptation also in the long-term run.
Good. Thank you, panelists, for responding. And I think it's, if we have got other, I would really like to get responses or questions or challenges as to whether things like, trust funds work, microfinance work for upscaling adaptation at community level, and to get examples from people who are using different approaches. And I'd like us to think about, the issue of the case of wicked problems that was raised earlier on, which really complicates the economic dimension of climate change adaptation, and I think it's a big subject which requires us to rethink how we do economics, including our use of tools such as cost-benefit analysis, cost-effectiveness analysis, and so on. The underlying premise about adaptation and what we are adapting to, and the extent to which we are able to represent the future with these tools. But can we have some direct and hard responses about how some of the market approaches can help to scale up adaptation at community level? we've got a question here and a question there. So we'll start here, go to the other row, and then the front two in the middle row.
Helena Wright from Imperial College. I noticed there was a similar problem raised in two of the talks. Firstly, the one about microfinance, and also the one about fair trade. They both mentioned that sometimes those initiatives might not reach the very poorest. And I just had the question, how is that being addressed in those two cases?
Thank you very much. Let's move to the other. Be very brief because we have got only 2 minutes.
Yes, my question is concerning to fair trade, and what I need to ask is that in fair trade, I mean considering fair trade, can you hear me? Yeah. So one of the issues in South Asian economies is that all the agriculturist people, they are haunted by this middleman, like who's there and who takes the chunk of their main income. So how do you see the role of middleman in economics of CBA? Do you want to integrate him into the cycle, or do you think you can put him out? But there is a word of caution. This guy, middleman, he's too strong. He has political links and everything. So
thank you.
This is what my question is.
George and the lady next to her.
All right. I'm George from Zambia. We have heard about the costs of projects, but what we haven't heard about is what happens to the individuals involved. So my question is on the capacity of microfinance to change the income status of participants. Do we have concrete examples of, for example, people where they have risen from $1 per day to maybe $4 or $5, or can somebody move from low income to middle income through these microfinance?
Or even to $1.50.
Something like that.
Sad.
Yes. My question was to Jessica, and you mentioned 5,000 beneficiaries from the coffee farming project. What are your market mechanisms? Where is the coffee sold, and what are the transportation links to your project? Thank you. Do we have a minute for another one?
In 10 seconds, yeah.
Ms. Campos, how do you determine what is a marine protected area, and how much of the total sea cucumbers that were cultivated generally, how did you narrow it down to MPAs, and how many years of data did you collate together to get the net present value? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could you please make responses in less than 15 seconds each, if possible?
Okay, so about not reaching the poorest, it is a huge challenge. If you work with a farmer organisation, obviously their membership is going to be who they want to work with first and foremost. There's by no means will farmer organisations be the only vehicle, the only institution for delivering CBA, and I think it will require partnerships between farmer organisations and other local organisations to ensure that everyone is reached. In terms of the middleman, that's not really within my realms of experience, in that the producer organisations that we work with export directly out of the country, so we don't really work with middlemen. Sorry not to really answer your question, but we can try and discuss it afterwards, but I probably am not the expert on that. And then market mechanisms and transport links, again, that's just going to really differ by organisations. In this case, for example, when coffee's been delivered, the organisation will send out trucks to each primary society, so the farmers will deliver into the primary society, and then that's collected and delivered to the organisation, which will then export it. And we have a number of mechanisms to support access to market and access to different buyers, but maybe if you want more detail on that, we can discuss it afterwards. Thanks.
Okay, just building on what Jessica said about how can we reach the very poorest is, I guess, through targeted interventions. I mean, it's always difficult because people also have to have the incentive and the motivation to take on these loans as well. Perhaps another possibility is focus on groups, get people organized in groups that can take on a loan. And then in terms of examples around how microfinance has changed the income status of individuals, I know there are many examples, especially in Bangladesh and India. I can't think of any straight to hand, but I do have some literature that I can share that can provide those examples.
Let me just address the question of George. I think in our project, what we're seeing, that farmers who usually do rain-fed farming, they earn per harvest or per year 300 to 400 reais, which is about $200. If you can make a project that is very little intensive in terms of space you need, drip irrigation is very space intensive compared to other agricultural techniques, you can add 80, 300 per month. So I think this is a very, even with the smallest system. The bigger systems, we have seen that farmers can make up to 500, up to over 1,000 reais per month. And so I think this is a very big increase. And not even taking into account that people also increase food security.
There was a question about determining the very poor, although this is not covered in my study. No. I remember in a project that I did for the Asian Development Bank about rehabilitation of a seaport. It's a poverty and social analysis. We determined the poor and the very poor by looking at the poverty incidence, the poverty threshold. But then those are on a provincial and regional scale. So if you want to determine at the local level or the municipal level, you have to conduct a survey, and then you compare that with the indicators, with the regional and provincial data, and then from there you also have different stakeholders, so that you will have very poor among the farmers, very poor among the buyers or the traders, and so on. Now, with regards to the question on MPAs, the new Fisheries Code of the Philippines stipulates that 15% of municipal or local water should be allotted as an MPA. However, you have to undergo a process. So the new ones, the earlier ones that were determined, were done in coordination with the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources and the UP Marine Science Institute. And then you need community participation and consent in order to implement it. Plus, there should be a budget. Then it has to be approved at the local level, and it even goes up to the level of Congress. So it really takes time. And then how would you qualify? Now, based on the technical assessment made by the fisheries or marine scientists, then it would fall under that, then it would qualify. So that's it.
Good, thank you very much. Lunch is waiting for us, and we wouldn't want to delay you by going further into discussions. What I would like to ask you to do is to contribute to the chapter of this book by case studies as well as expertise, case studies of where economic instruments, tools, market channels have worked and have not worked, so that we can inform decision makers appropriately. I would like to hand over to my co-chair to conclude.
Thank you very much. Let us give one big, bold hand for the practitioners. Thank you. As we have heard, that most of them have come up with their own establishment or decision to take a research, investigate, look at the economic as a tool to participate in the CBA. And with that, we have had a lot of experience from their own experience established through their research and studies. And I think the most important message that from different experience is that at the end of the day, we are really looking at economic empowerment and the impact on climate change and adaptation. And as we will be listening, observing from different experiences, as we have in the last 2 days, our own observation that economic empowerment is one key aspect to CBA or community-based climate adaptation. So with that, I just want to say on behalf of the participants, we thank you for being here. We're a bit late for our lunch, but if we go out, and for the participants, congratulations, and thank you very much for the information. Thank you.
Yeah, we're fine. How are you? Nice. I saw you yesterday, but you were rushing. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We'll see you.
Unfortunately, there weren't so many people think economics, they immediately
Hello.
Hey, where do I sit?
There.
My students are too far away.
Will you finish that?
Won't be long.
Welcome to the Community-Based Adaptation Conference in Dhaka, Bangladesh. And we have a small break, so we've got a chance to nab one or two important participants, and none more important, I think, than Nahau Rooney from the Manus Provincial Administration in Papua New Guinea. That's right?
Yes.
What's your actual title when I say from the administration?
I am in the policy area at the Manus Provincial Government Assembly, and I'm a member of the Manus Government Assembly, and I'm the chairman of Climate Change, Culture, Tourism, and Health Department.
Right, and I know you've got a lot of experience on both sides of government and in business, and you've got awards. You're a CBE and a CMS. CMS is Commander of the Melanesian Star. Is that right? Champion of the Melanesian Star. Right, thank you. Okay, yes, yeah, Papua New Guinea award. Okay, well, I've got a star with me, so that's great. Okay, let's get straight into it, because I know you want to go and enjoy your short break from the work. Papua New Guinea, are people aware of climate change?
It has become an issue that's being addressed, and a lot of people are now hearing about the word climate change. And because the word climate change is an English word, people are a bit confused and they're not quite sure what it is. But when it comes to the reality about climate changes, everyone in Papua New Guinea communities are aware, very well aware of what is happening on the ground. Our weather is changing, there's a lot of water, sea level rising, especially on the islands and coastal villages. There's a change in heat, and all this, they know about it.
So, yes, so the words don't matter, but they know that something is changing.
That's right. The word, as I said, because it's an English word, people don't quite understand. But in terms of the reality, the people are fully aware of the changes in terms of the timing, like in Port Moresby, for example, which is our national capital. It used to be the almost 4 or 5 months is the rainy season, and then the other one is the dry season. Whereas now in Port Moresby, it's raining anytime, and it's unexpected. And this is what the climate change is, and people are now relating to saying, oh, so what you're talking about, the government's talking about climate change, is that it? And they said, yes, that's what it is.
And do people expect governments to act, or your government to act?
Yes, our government has taken a very positive stage. Last 2008, our policy on the new was established in 2008. They launched it last year, and I want to commend the current government under the leadership of Grand Chief Sir Michael Somare, who have launched the 2050 vision, which is comprised of 7 main goals, or what they call pillars, and out of that 7 goals, the 5th pillars or goal of the 2050 vision is on emphasizing climate change and environmental conservation.
Okay, I don't want to oversimplify it, but what do you think are the main, or do people agree in Papua New Guinea, what the main impact of climate change, the one that people fear most or are most worried about? Is it rain? Is it drought? Is it seawater, sea rising, or what?
Papua New Guinea is mountainous. The mainland of Papua New Guinea is mountainous, but at the moment what is becoming more obvious is the coastal villages and the island provinces. Like we do have volcano. 1997 we have one of the worst tsunami which took place in the Aitape in West Sepik province, and even just not long ago the Japanese tsunami. We also have an impact on that. And I come from Manus Island, which is a the smallest province, but we experienced, we were alerted by the disaster committee and the weather people to be ready and expect anything between 9 a.m. and 2 a.m., 9 p.m. and 2 a.m. And by 11:30, 1 in the morning, we could see the water rise coming through, and some of our coastal and island were affected very badly from that Japanese tsunami.
So preparedness, disaster preparedness worked in this case for you?
Yes, it's very important, and especially we would appreciate it if our technical scientists, people who are expert on weather, and they could tell us about, and at least they can predict and warn us that this is likely to happen. So I think the preparedness is important, and I must say that we were very happy with the introduction of digital telephones, and the telephones that were, from where I come from, it was through the telephone that people were communicating all around the island. And we had radio. Our radio Manus was open 24 hours, and anyone could ring to the radio, and as something happens on the island, as the sea rise came through the village, they just called back and said, oh, this is what's happening to us at the moment. And it was very, very exciting. And again, that is also a contribution attributed to the new technology. So in the climate change adaptation, the technology is important, the information of awareness is important, and the government has to take a positive action to address the issue of climate change, because it is a development issue, and the difference between climate change and the other cross-cutting issues is that it's unprepared. We cannot tell when is tsunami going to come up, or when is the climate change. Anything can happen anytime at its will, not in our control.
I was in a session earlier and I heard you answer a question about what would you wish, if you had a single wish, what would you want government, how would you want government to act? And you said money. Can you just explain that a little bit more? Do you think that in your case, is that also true, or is it people's experience and sharing of experience that might be useful, or do you think it really comes down to government allocating funds to deal with this problem?
Thank you. I think when I say money, I don't mean giving money out. What I mean is that for the first time now, Papua New Guinea government has identified climate change as a development issue. And as far as I can see it, and I believe that it should not be left at that. It should be treated and addressed like health, like education, like business, like any other government instrumentals, that money must be allocated to the department so that the department can organize themselves, equip themselves with the necessary tools and human resources to get out there and carry out awareness and to implement that policy on environment and sustainability and climate change. Because without that resources, and government is responsible for that, and it must be part of the budgetary plans and money allocation to the department, so that department, yes, we rely too on the, must say thank you to the international donor partners who are at the moment helping us a lot. They're giving financial assistance from there, but our own government must take that responsibility, because then we can build our own technical and human resources to be responsible to carry out the necessary information and necessary objectives to make sure that people are aware of the climate change that's taking place.
Is there a gender perspective to this? You hear many people who don't talk the lingo of development groups and climate groups say gender. What's it got to do with gender? Climate is changing, we must do something about it. But there are a number of sessions at this meeting on this so-called gender perspective. Do you think that's a real issue?
Yes, we call it also, we relate it to climate change, and time are changing, and the women who in Papua New Guinea who once used to take the back seat or on the periphery, today we have a number of professional lawyers, engineers, pilots, captains of the boats and everything else. So gender is also another issue that has to be, is part of our Papua New Guinea 2050 vision, and the government has to also address that. But from my own experience, to me, I feel that the key to friendly, conducive environment will depend entirely on education. And if anyone out there, women or children or communities, education is the key to development. And it is only by having that necessary education, quality education, we begin to respect one another, acknowledge the skills and talents that each one of us has, regardless of sex or faith or race. Because at the end of the day, the world, the community needs that skilled person to introduce, to put back into the community where we come from.
Do you think that climate change may derail Papua New Guinea's development efforts? Because like many developing countries, it's investing in education and pursuing a development program. Here comes another problem on top of all the other problems that could be so serious that it could. Do you think it could actually knock back the country's development program?
I hope not, because as I said, at least of the 7 pillars, I can't remember all of them now, but for the first time now, the climate change has become part of that. So the economic empowerment is there, fair and just society is there, peaceful and economic empowerment, everything is there. So the climate change is not necessarily will derail other activities. It has become part of the it's a cross-cutting issues, and it has to be addressed like all the other development issues and collectively be seen together, because we cannot talk about climate change without talking with other activities. Let me say the example is that climate change is have come now. The forest degradation is one thing that we have seen. So hopefully that the climate change will also support the idea that please don't cut all your logs. And I like the concept that they said leave your tree standing and you will have a life earning. Because they said don't cut your trees, because Papua New Guinea has probably one of the biggest country with we have our greens and trees and logs are still standing there, and it's at least one thing. It's now helping us to rethink about logging, and if we leave our trees there, at least we're talking about carbon dating, we're talking about trading, that at least just leave the trees there and it'll protect the environment.
Okay, before you rush off, I know another session looming. What about conferences? People often say, especially outsiders, say, oh, it's another conference, it's another waste of money, everyone flies here, flies back, we talk. Do you think a conference such as this is useful?
Very much so. I mean, even when I told my people and relatives that, oh, I'm off to Bangladesh, and they said, what are you going to do now? Not to another meeting. I said, yes, but this is one of those meetings that for the first time, I'm going to go and hear about the climate change and what is happening. And I think there is a misconception from, I can say, not only Papua New Guineans, but other people too, that we spend a lot of money on conferencing. But at the same time, people don't realize, and as you can witness, and I've seen this week, and I'm very thankful that I am here. One, I learn a lot from what is happening in Bangladesh. I read and hear about the big water and ground. But when I saw what people are doing, I'm very impressed with how and they are surviving, they are resilient about their change. I think the important things about such conferences, and especially at the international level, is that we come together to interact with one another, with different institutions, with different experiences, and then putting together those knowledge. And I think this is where, like at my session this morning, yes, it's good to come together, but let's talk globally, but act locally. So that at this meeting, in sharing our ideas, our experiences, and the knowledge and skills that we put together has to be put together in either a book or an information paper that in the end all of us can take it back to our country and use it as a tool to further disseminate that information to our own community and to where the experience is, so that we can learn more and bring more, because it is, and it's all about learning and experiencing, interacting from one another, and we learn from one another's country. And I think it's very positive.
Okay, thank you very much, Nahau Rooney, Provincial Administration, businesswoman, activist, so many hats, and champion. So thanks very much indeed.